This is Apple's iPhone Air announced alongside the iPhone 17 series, and after using it for a little while, it really just feels like a bit of a flex on Apple's part because what they've managed to create here is pretty impressive. But the tricky part is figuring out who this phone is actually for. Because on one hand, it does everything you'd expect an iPhone to do. Phone calls, messages, apps, photos, videos, all that's here. But on the other hand, the main selling point is really just the design. It feels like this phone was built more for the people who care a lot about how their phone looks and feels in the hand, maybe even more than just raw utility. And while I'm sure that is a demographic that exists, I don't think the demographic is most people. The iPhone Air comes in at just 5.64mm thin, which is just barely slimmer than Samsung's S25 Edge, and it immediately gives you that wow factor the moment you pick it up. Outside the S25 Edge, there's probably no other phone that could replicate the wow factor of holding a phone this thin. It just feels incredible in the hand. It's got polished titanium sides, a back glass with ceramic shield for better crack resistance, and a display with ceramic shield 2 for extra scratch resistance. Now those are just branding terms that mean all the glass is more durable. Now the camera setup is also new. Instead of the camera bumps we've been used to, Apple's gone with a camera bar design they call the Plateau, with a single camera lens on the left and flash and mic on the right. The most impressive thing about this new design is the fact that pretty much most of the phone's internals, chips, camera, and a bunch of other important phone stuff is under that plateau, while the rest of the body is pretty much just battery. The button and port layout is all familiar though. The left side has your volume buttons and the action button, the right side has the sleep wake button and the camera control button, just like last year. On the bottom is the USB-C port and the mics, while on the top of the display is the single earpiece speaker. Nothing out of the ordinary there, apart from the speaker layout, more on that later. But again, the thinness and feel in the hand are really what sell this design. Moving on to the display, this one comes in at 6.5 inches, which lands right between the base and Pro iPhone's 6.3 inch displays and the Pro Max's 6.9 inch display. But in everyday use, I tend to think it feels a little closer to the Pro Max. Usually the smaller 6.1 or 6.3 inch displays feel kinda cramped coming from a Max size phone, but this one didn't. It somehow manages to feel bigger without being bulky. It's pretty much the Pro Max screen experience, and the size is a lot easier to live with. The screen itself is excellent. It's 120Hz, so everything from scrolling to animations to gaming all feels smoother than any of the past non-Pro iPhones. It also has the always-on display previously exclusive to the Pro models, which I personally love. The option to have your wallpaper always on is a super nice touch, but if you're not into that, you do also have the option to just have the clock with or without notifications, or you can just turn off always on entirely. The resolution is 2736 by 1260 with a pixel density of 460 pixels per inch, which pretty much just means everything will be super sharp. Though honestly, sharpness isn't really something modern phones struggle with anymore. Another really nice touch is the fact that it's still OLED, so you also get those perfect blacks where pixels just turn off completely wherever they're pure black elements on screen. Brightness is also really solid, up to 3000 nits outdoors, all the way down to 1 nit in the dark. So you'll have no issues with visibility no matter where you are. You do still get the dynamic island at the same size as before, and Face ID continues to work just as well as ever. There is technically an anti-reflective coating now, though it's not as good as some of Samsung's offerings, so you'll still see some pretty intense reflections from bright lights or windows. Now, performance on the iPhone Air is pretty much exactly what you'd expect from Apple at this point, just really solid. It's running the A19 Pro system on a chip, same one you'll find in the Pro iPhones, just with one fewer GPU core. In real life, that difference means absolutely nothing. Everyday stuff like scrolling, messaging, switching between apps is all pretty much instant. Apple's been ahead in raw performance for a while now, so this just continues that trend. If you don't really care about the nitty-gritty, feel free to skip to this timestamp to move on to my experience with the battery. But for the more technical crowd, the A19 Pro does have a few welcome upgrades under the hood. Each GPU core now has its own neural accelerator, so anything related to AI or machine learning runs quite a bit faster. Apple also says it can hold peak performance longer, which mostly matters for gaming or other heavy tasks. I'm not much of a mobile gamer, but I did try a few titles, and everything ran super smoothly. The only thing worth noting is that the phone can get a bit warmer than I'm comfortable with under load. Nothing alarming, just something to be aware of if you do a lot of gaming, editing, or anything that really pushes the processor. The Air also introduces Apple's new C1X modem, which is a step up from the C1 in the iPhone 16e. It's supposed to be faster and more power efficient, but it still doesn't support millimeter wave 5G, which honestly most people won't care about since those ultra fast towers are still kinda rare and US only. On Verizon's network, I did notice a couple of spots where the cellular data connection wasn't as stable as the 16 or 17 Pro Max, but outside of that, data speeds and reliability have been great. There's also a new N1 networking chip that handles Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 6, and also Thread for smart home stuff. Unless you've already got a Wi-Fi 7 router, you probably won't notice much of a difference, but everything works seamlessly, and the same goes for Bluetooth. But because the N1 is Apple's own chip, it does allow them to tune it just right for the best balance between performance and efficiency. And while this review isn't about software, it is worth mentioning that in my opinion, iOS 26 really does complement the hardware nicely. I've been enjoying things like liquid glass, call screening, and message filtering, which are small touches that make the overall experience feel more cohesive. Though I do know there are a lot of people out there who really don't like liquid glass, which is understandable. But anywho, performance here is exactly what you'd hope for. Fast, smooth, and dependable, even if the Pro label isn't necessarily in the name. Now, one of the biggest concerns people have with the iPhone Air is battery life. It's so thin that everyone assumed it would be terrible, but honestly, that hasn't really been the case for me. I usually put my phone on a MagSafe charger overnight, and by morning, it's sitting at 80% ready to go. I do normally limit my charging to 80% to preserve battery health, and even with that, the experience is still pretty great. It still gets me through the day without any major issues. That said, my daily routine probably does help. I use wired CarPlay, which means my phone charges little every time I drive. Most weekdays I'm bouncing between home, school, and work, so it gets those many top-ups throughout the day. Weekends are about the same since I'm usually in the car at least once or twice. So for my lifestyle, battery life hasn't really been a problem. But if you're someone who spends most of your day away from a charger or doesn't drive much, it might be a different story. On heavier days, lots of screen time, not much driving, I definitely notice the battery draining faster than I'm used to. It's not bad, but it's not what I'd call reliable if you're someone who really depends on all-day endurance. Apple did launch a new MagSafe battery pack alongside the Air, which is pretty telling. I'm sure it works fine, but once you attach it, the phone basically doubles in thickness, and that kind of defeats the whole point of buying a phone this thin in the first place. But that being said, battery is definitely something you'll want to be aware of depending on how you use your phone. Now, one of the biggest compromises with the iPhone Air is the camera setup, or really the lack of one. You only get a single 48 megapixel rear camera. Now, because it's 48 megapixels, you can zoom to 2x with what Apple calls optical quality zoom. Basically, it crops in on that high resolution sensor without losing much detail. It also gives you a few different focal lengths at 1x, those being 26, 28, and 35 millimeters, which is why Apple says it's like having 4 cameras in one. Technically, that's true, but in practice, you don't really get the same versatility as the multi-lens systems on the Pro models or even the base model. That said, image quality is still really solid. You can get absolutely great looking photos with sharp detail and great dynamic range. You're just limited when it comes to zooming in or going super wide. There's no ultra wide, which is what usually enables the classic 0.5, so no sweeping landscape shots or close-up macro stuff. There is also no Pro RAW, so you're not going to get as much flexibility if you edit your photos. The front camera though, is where things get pretty interesting. It's the same across all iPhone 17 models this year, and it's kind of a sleeper upgrade in my opinion. It's now an 18 megapixel square sensor, which enables center stage, so you can take both portrait and landscape selfies while holding the phone vertically. It even uses a bit of AI to automatically switch to a wider frame when it detects more people in the shot. And honestly, the quality is really impressive. The front lens now holds its own against the rear ones for photos and videos, which makes it a really nice upgrade if you take a lot of selfies, record vlog-style videos, or make video calls often. Of course, with a phone this thin, there are going to be compromises, and depending on what you value most, a few of them could be deal breakers. The most obvious one is the camera. Like we talked about, the iPhone Air only has a single rear lens. So if you regularly use the ultra-wide or telephoto cameras on your current iPhone, or even just the ultra-wide on the non-Pro models, this will probably feel like a step back. Personally, that was one of the reasons I decided not to go with the Air myself. And there's battery life. As impressive as the design is, physics still applies. There's only so much room for a battery in an enclosure this small. Apple's done a great job optimizing efficiency, but the truth is, it's still worse than other phones at this price. If you're someone who's constantly on the go without access to a charger, that's gonna matter. For me, it didn't really cause any issues day to day, but I don't love the idea of not being able to rely on my phone when I actually need it. And finally, audio. We didn't really talk about this much, but the iPhone Air doesn't have stereo speakers, just a single one at the top of the screen, and it's noticeably quieter. I almost never play things out loud on my phone, so for me it's a non-issue. But if you watch a lot of videos or listen to music or podcasts without headphones, it's worth keeping in mind. So this is a $1,000 phone, and honestly, I actually think that's mostly fine. You're getting a polished titanium frame, a glass back, a beautiful display, and of course that insanely thin design that makes the iPhone Air feel less like a gadget and more like a piece of jewelry. It's one of those devices you just want to pick up and hold, and from a design standpoint, it's kind of a masterpiece. But if the things Apple had to sacrifice to make it this thin, the camera, the speaker, the battery, matter a lot to you, then this probably isn't the phone for you. And I also can't really ignore the fact that the base iPhone 17 exists. It's either the same or better in almost every way apart from thinness and screen size for about $200 less. You get two 48 megapixel cameras, a main and ultra wide, the same 6.3-inch 120Hz always on display as the 17 Pro, better battery life, and stereo speakers. Even compared to the Pro models, the differences that separate the Air from the Pro are the same ones that separate the base 17 from the 17 Pro. So you're not really missing out on much there. So while I can't give you a definitive buy it or don't buy it, I will say this, the iPhone Air is a beautiful piece of hardware. It's striking, it's incredibly well built, and it's just a fun reminder of how fun phone design has come. But it also makes some trade-offs, and whether those are worth it really depends on what you value most in a phone. If you're after something thin, premium, and different, this is it. If you just want the best balance of features for the money, maybe look elsewhere. But I'd love to hear what you think. Is the design enough to make up for the compromises, or would you rather go with something like the base iPhone 17 instead? Either way, hope this was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.